Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is U.S. immigration attorney Hardam Tripathi from Trip Law, based out of Lakeland, Florida, and serving you with respect to your immigration needs. Today, we will be speaking with you about some exciting developments with respect to the EB-5 program. The new EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022 has actually come out recently with respect to Congress promulgating these laws and ultimately making these things happen within the congressional level. And this could impact your case. So let's jump right in and discuss how this type of new bill, this type of new potential law that's going to be coming out through the pipelines and will be eventually signed by the president, affects your immigration case with respect to EB-5. So basically what's been going on is the EB-5 program is basically an investor-based program where you have to invest a certain amount of money to ultimately bring your family over, meaning your spouse, yourself, and your children who are under the age of 21 and unmarried. But what do these changes mean for you? There's been some exciting developments, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So ultimately, Congress just recently went through this whole ordeal where they just passed this Reform Integrity Act of 2022, and there's two key words that I would like to highlight: reform and integrity. This affects your case because not only did they reform, not only did they change a lot of things with respect to the EB-5 program, but they actually brought a lot of integrity into it with respect to the actual process, and this ultimately affects your case. So we're going to talk about today a few things that discuss kind of the changes in the EB-5 program compared to what it was in the past. So let's jump right in. So first of all, Congress did pass this, and we did discuss that the EB-5 program is an employment-based program. It's basically a program where you invest as an entrepreneur or as a businessman or woman, ultimately investing in a commercial enterprise. And what you're doing is you're ultimately investing your hard-earned money from your country that you come from and investing it in these great United States of America. Now, what ends up happening is there are job requirements, and we have other videos about this, and you can always feel free to give us a call, and we'll be more than happy to discuss this with you. But ultimately, you create these 10 U.S. jobs, you decide to invest your money in a TEA, aka a targeted employment area, or a non-TEA, a non-targeted employment area, and ultimately you're basically investing in that commercial enterprise, you're stimulating the U.S. economy, you're creating jobs, and ultimately making the United States a better place to live, not only for Americans, but for you as the immigrant investor. So ultimately what this process does, the EB-5 program, is it does allow, like we had just discussed, the opportunity for you to basically get a green card. You get a visa, an EB-5 visa, which then will adjust later to a green card, and now you have the opportunity to have yourself, your spouse, and then your children that are under the age of 21 and unmarried to ultimately come to the United States on this EB-5 program. Not only do your children now get the access to public education, not only does your spouse have the opportunity to work as a derivative beneficiary, but you yourself as the investor has the opportunity to basically get a green card, make a return on an investment, and ultimately live that American dream. So today we're going to talk about what recent developments have happened with respect to the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022. So basically what you're looking at is, number one, you're looking at the prices actually changing, the thresholds. Originally, if you had seen what the last EB-5 update was, that it was a $1 million investment in a non-TEA. What is a TEA, by the way? A TEA is a targeted employment area. That's an area that's either a rural area or an area that is basically underserved, an area where there's a high unemployment rate and there's certain thresholds, but you can give us a call, we'll talk to you about that. But basically it's an area where there does need to be a stimulus in the U.S. economy. What's really good about your case, and you as the immigrant who's probably listening in right now, the changes are actually for the better, and we'll discuss that. Basically what's happened is instead of $1 million, it has gone up to $1,050,000 in a non-TEA, a non-targeted employment area. So there is about a $50,000 increase. You may wonder, well, that's a lot more money. Why is that? Well, we'll talk about that here in this video, but we got to understand kind of what the impact this will be on you, the actual immigrant investor. So for a TEA area, however, a targeted employment area, it used to be $500,000. However, now with this new development, with how Congress has ultimately decided to create this law, you're going from about $500,000 as a threshold requirement to about $800,000. So you're seeing about a $300,000 increase. However, this is a really good news for you because as an investor, yes, you're spending more money, but there's that integrity part of it. There's the Reform and Integrity Act. They did reform it. They did add more money in terms of how much you have to invest. However, you have now the integrity aspect, which we'll get to in this video a little later on. So just for starters, yes, it did go for a non-TEA area. It went from $1 million to $1,050,000. And for a TEA area, it went from about $500,000 to $800,000. Yes, you're paying a little bit more money. However, you're getting a lot more in return. And so we will talk about that. And you can always give us a call at our law firm here at Trip Law, and we'd be more than happy to kind of walk you through that process and kind of show you the best path forward, the path of least resistance that'll ultimately give you your American dream as it relates to that investment. The number two thing is, this is the biggest thing, right? This is a thing called basically the Regional Center Program. Regional centers are a vehicle. It's kind of like an opportunity per se for you as that investor. It's an opportunity for you to ultimately have multiple investors get pulled in and basically use the Regional Center Program as a way to ultimately get a benefit from an immigration standpoint. What this program has done, this new Reform Act, right, of the year, what it's done is they've actually extended it. They've extended it for 5 years. This is unprecedented. This is something that I think is going to be really good for investors. You can sleep safely at night and feel comfortable knowing that the government, the Congress of the United States of America, both the House and the Senate, have ultimately decided that instead of doing these authorizations for a few months at a time and a few years at a time and things of that nature, instead they've done it for 5 years. This gives you a sense of security as that immigrant investor. So instead of going for a few months to a years at a time, now you have 5 years of authorization as of today's video in 2022. It is May 17th today, so this is the day we made this video so that you would understand that this is 5 years from now. So basically what's going to happen is most likely September of 2027. That's how long this program has now been reauthorized. What's really good about this is that ultimately you have that sense of security. That's number one. Number two is there's basically two types of ways to take part in the EB-5 program. You as an investor probably listening in on this video are very sophisticated. You have earned such good money in your country, or you've done a lot of good work to get to the level that you're at now. So basically utilizing this law, understanding that this reauthorization of the regional centers is actually a blessing in disguise. What's going to end up happening is there's only two ways to ultimately do the EB-5. You can either do a direct investment, which is still a popular option for a lot of our clients, or you can actually go down that regional center path. What ultimately happens is the regional center is actually one of the most popular methods of actually going through with this process and allowing you as the immigrant investor to pool money together in a project based on a regional center, an area where we have a lot of people based on jurisdictions, based on parts of the United States, based on your investment needs, based on kind of what your interests are. You're ultimately having an opportunity where now jobs are classified and quantified. This is actually a strategy, a benefit that I think our congressional leaders in the United States have found that was very helpful to the good people who decide to invest in this great nation. And so ultimately, not only are you having jobs being classified, not only are you having jobs being quantified based on economics reports and whatnot, but you're also having a level of investor involvement. You're basically getting that level of involvement in terms of knowing what you're investing in. But here's the benefit. You listening to this video today as that potential investor who's probably going to give us a call, hopefully, and want to know a little bit more about this program. Well, y'all are very busy people. So when you look at this regional center authorization, what you're really looking at is the amount of investment time that you're putting in. Time is money. And so the level of investor investment, and what I mean by that is not the financial time of it, but the actual, not the financial amounts, but the time that you're spending, that's going to be very advantageous to you as that investor. So there's a lot of those developments, and we can talk about that more in our consults when you decide to give us a call. Now, another thing about that regional center reauthorization, usually it used to be temporary, right? We talked about the few years at a time, few months at a time, but now it's a 5-year reauthorization. This is very good. Now this gives peace of mind, basically, peace of mind to the investors, knowing that this is here for a midterm. It's here for the long haul, per se. And there's a lot of changes going on, and that's why you hire the attorneys, right? That's why you hire Trip Law, and that's why you realize that there's always changes in policy, there's changes in law as it relates to this very complicated and complex program that is the EB-5 program. And so that's the number two thing. So we did talk about the changes in the amount of the thresholds from $500,000 to $800,000 for a non-TEA, and also from the $1 million to $1,050,000 for the non-TEA, excuse me. So ultimately, for a TEA, you're looking at 500 to 800. Non-TEA, you're looking at $1 million to $1.5 million, right? 50,000, excuse me. So basically, that's number one. And then number two, you're looking at the reauthorization of the regional center. So we're here at these two things. Now let's talk about number three. This is the integrity component of the law. They did call this, as part of the act. They did say that integrity was a part of it, the Reform and Integrity Act. The integrity is you as the investor are actually protected. This protects you listening in today to make sure there's no rogue actors, someone who's not going to just take your money and run with it. You have SEC compliance, that's the Securities and Exchange Commission. You have the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, who handles all the taxes. And then you have the attorneys, you have USCIS, which is the Immigration Service. So ultimately what the goal when these congressional members ultimately decided to make this bill and pass it, what they decided was that there was a lot of issues and fraud in these regional center investments. And one thing is, most of y'all listening in may be in other countries. You are not in the United States, possibly, maybe as of now of this recording, and maybe listening in. You probably are wary. You want to make sure your money is protected. You've earned it. You've worked so hard for it. So why not have a policy in place that makes sure that your money is basically going through some sort of compliance mechanism? So ultimately what's going on is there's a lot more oversight in this bill. And when you meet with us in our law office, we'll go through all of that together. But long story short, what's going on is you're having a lot of issues with fraud. And the SEC and the IRS and USCIS, all these agencies, these alphabet soup, they're dealing with this. And you're having to deal with it. You as that investor, you're doing it the right way. You're doing it right, and you're trying to basically make a good life for your family, as well as make a return on your hard-earned investment. And so ultimately what this Reform Act will do is it does reduce fraud. It puts compliance measures in place. It puts you in a position of ease and comfortability where you feel and you know that you have the law behind you, and you have attorneys such as ourselves from Trip Law who are willing to protect and fight for you and advocate for you on your behalf. So this is actually a really good bill. This is a really good bill that's turned into law. It's going to happen, and we're very excited for that. Finally, there's two more things. There's something that's a lot of people don't talk about, a lot of attorneys don't talk about, but I'd like to discuss that with you today. People are basically in non-immigrant status, right, when they're trying to basically come to this country, and they're doing their job. They're working. If they end up deciding to go through the work authorization process and get their EAD or work permit. But basically, here's the biggest nuance in the law, right, the new policy. This law now allows you as that investor, if you're already in the United States of America, these great states, right, then what happens is you now can concurrently file your I-526. That's that immigrant petition, right? And on top of that, you can now also file your adjustment of status. What used to happen way back when was you'd have to file the I-526 first, and then the immigration petition with USCIS, you have to file that. And there'd be hundreds of pages of documents that you'd probably have to submit. And it would take forever. I mean, it would take months, 18 months or more. This is a lot. And your time is valuable as that investor. You are a sophisticated man or woman who has spent a lot of your time and hard-earned money, and you want to get that green card. You want to get that EB-5 visa and that benefit. So why do you have to wait? Well, here's what this new policy does. What it does, this new law, is it allows you as the investor, if you're already in the United States, you can now have your I-526 and concurrently file the adjustment of status green card petition application, the 485, the I-485 application, and our firm will be more than happy to help you with that and walk you through all the supporting document requirements, make sure that we communicate to the government on your behalf. We want to make sure that this is the path of least resistance. We want to make sure that this is something that you're already dealing with a lot. Let the attorneys handle the rest. It's a lot. But basically, this new policy now allows you, instead of waiting 18 months to get the first I-526 approval and then applying for the I-485 adjustment, you can now file concurrently, meaning at the same time you can file both applications, which ultimately expedites and speeds up that process. So this is something that's really good. And the reason I think the public policy precedent behind it is USCIS has a lot of backlogs. We've all dealt with COVID. We all understand that there's been embassy and consulate shortages. There's been things in people's lives. Well, this is a great policy, and I think our senators in Washington, D.C. understood that. And they basically, what they've done is allowed now the petitioner, meaning you, the immigrant, probably listening in on this video, the opportunity to file that I-526 along with your I-485 together, so you can now concurrently file and expedite and speed up that process. So that's really good. And on top of all that, your spouse, they're very important. He or she are very important to you if you're listening in right now and you know that your spouse is an extension of you. You know, you don't make it somewhere as a sophisticated investor without that spouse who's been with you by your side. And so what's another good thing is this policy now allows your spouse to ultimately get the benefit of a work authorization, EAD, an employment authorization document, aka a work permit, right? And now they get the work permit and advanced parole basically a lot sooner than based on the previous law and the policy. So ultimately, this is a step in the right direction. I think USCIS, understood as a agency, the Immigration Service understood that there were backlogs, this is the way to reduce it, and ultimately do a better job. And then finally, this is probably the most important part of this video. Take some notes. I think this will be very helpful. Ultimately, there's something called set-asides. So we're kind of getting into the nitty-gritty, but when you come to our office, we'll kind of talk to you about this. But this is very important. A lot of lawyers don't talk about this, but I want to give you this education. I think it's very important that our clients get educated on the subject matter. There's basically set-asides. There are ways for you to expedite your process because basically what's going on is everyone prior to you probably applying are suffering with these long waiting lines, right? Long waiting periods. Well, what happens is we at this firm are able to hopefully assist you based on the nature of what's going on in immigration law and policy, allowing you a legal and strategy-based approach to ultimately invest in a set-aside. And what that means is this. Currently, USCIS has about 20% of their applications for EB-5 programs for rural projects. These are rural areas, right? These are basically TEAs, targeted employment areas. You also have about 10% set aside for high unemployment areas. And then you also have 2% in infrastructure projects. And so ultimately what this means for you, you're probably wondering listening to this video, what does this mean for me? You get to jump the line, basically. A lot of issues will come down because of this policy, I bet. But what's really neat is for people who have applied before you, you get to jump the line and now you have precedent. You are able to get your EB-5 visa / green card sooner rather than those people who applied before you because you're putting your hard-earned money in these certain projects. So ultimately, if you think about it, you can actually advantageously and strategically apply for certain projects based on high unemployment, infrastructure, or rural areas, and ultimately have a faster response time from USCIS, not taking into account priority processing and things like that, but you can now jump the gun. We like to always make sure our clients have the fastest service. And so if you're interested in that part of it, please do feel free to give us a call. So today we did talk about basically 5 separate things. We talked about the investment amount increase. We talked about for a non-TEA, it went from $1 million to $1,050,000, which is about a $50,000 increase. We talked about the $500,000 to $800,000 in a TEA with a $300,000 increase. A TEA meaning a targeted employment area, meaning an area that is basically rural or an area that has a high unemployment rate of sorts. We also talked today about the reauthorization of regional centers and how you now have 5 years from the date of this video to about September of 2027 to ultimately qualify for the regional center reauthorization process. We talked about jobs being classified and quantified. We talked about the level of your investment efforts, having the attorneys handle it for you. Trip Law, we are all about giving you peace of mind, path of least resistance, right? So we talked about that. We also talked about the integrity part of it. We talked about how there's oversight and compliance measures now in place to protect you as the investor, so there's no rogue actors out there trying to abuse your time and money. so that you feel safeguarded by your actual asset vehicle and your investment itself. We also talked about the concurrent filing of the I-526 petition for the immigrant petition, along with the adjustment of status if you're here already in the United States. And then finally, we talked about the set-asides. And this is we're just basically talking about the high-level view. If you come into our office, we will ensure that we will do our best to make sure that you are fully educated on this wonderful program, the policy developments that have taken place, how hard these senators and Congress members have worked to make sure that we protect not only the American people, but we protect our investors who are investing in this great nation so that you can live a better life for you, your spouse, and your unmarried child under the age of 21. So ultimately, these, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, based on my training and experience, we really do believe here at Trip Law that these changes are positive for the EB-5 program and ultimately for the investors. We represent the investors. We want to see you ultimately have the path of least resistance, have the best opportunity, and ultimately feel secure when you're in that foreign country trying to just live, the American dream and just get a slice of that American dream, and ultimately just invest that money here and make a return on that investment, but at the same time, get a green card, help your children, and ultimately help yourself and your spouse. So now is the time to apply. These are some exciting times for the EB-5 program. And if you're interested, do feel free to give us a call. My number here is 1-863-370-2427, or you can email us at info@trip-law.com. That's info@trip-law.com. And we'd be more than happy to assist. Ultimately, we want you to navigate these complex immigration laws and policies with ease, have the trust in the attorneys and the firm and the process, and ultimately get a piece of that American dream. So thank you so much. This is U.S. Immigration Attorney Hardam Tripathi from Trip Law, and we look forward to serving you and making sure that you have the best possible experience with respect to this convoluted and complicated immigration process. So thank you so much. Hopefully you found this interesting and rewarding and informative, and we look forward to servicing you. Thank you and have a great day.